So thanks everyone for your attendance, participation. I look forward to your comments. So what the paper I'm presenting today is about basically is whether people who visited the website that Andre is basically in charge of were influenced by that visit in their participation, in the way that they voted in the Netherlands in 2010. Okay, so we've had an amazing presentation from Rachel here this morning, which showed us kind of the kind of multi-headed monster that is the internet. You know, I think the big point to take away is people are living their lives online nowadays. You know, that's actually where life is happening a lot of time for a lot of people. Okay, and it's important that we start to ask, well, what are the consequences of the events that happen in that space for political outcomes that we care about? And obviously, being political scientists, what we care about probably most in terms of public opinion and public behaviour is voting. Okay, because voting is institutionally really, what separates democracies from other types of political systems. Okay, and we want to see does what happens online affect how people vote, and that's what this project is about. And this is a very specific type of thing that happens online that I sought to look at. Okay, so I'm going to explain now what a voter assistance website, voter voice application website actually is, and I think you'll see why we might think that it should be politically influential when you see how these sites work. Okay, so what are these sites? It's a horrible name, I have to say. It would be great to come up with some kind of catchier name for these things, because voter advice application website doesn't exactly trip off the tongue. So we usually call them, we abbreviate it to VAA, which still doesn't really sound nice. But anyway, what are these things? Fundamentally, basically, these are websites that provide users with voting advice. Okay, these are websites where human beings, voters in countries, go online to be advised about how to vote in an upcoming election. Okay, their unique selling point, the thing that makes them different from other campaign tools, other sources of voting advice, is that each advice is individually tailored to each user. Okay, so if you saw, it was actually in one of the readings that Rachel signed, the Time Magazine Person of the Year 2006 was you. Okay, it's because people are kind of constructing the internet now. Okay, what people like to get out of it is a kind of a reflection of themselves. And that's what these sites offer. It says, look, we're going to take your preferences on a range of political issues, and they usually take the most salient issues in the election. You can tell us what you think on each issue. We'll go out and measure what the parties think, and then we'll tell you how you stack up against the parties, and we'll tell you which party basically you're closest to on all these issues. And you can imagine, like in the Netherlands, with all the parties, and so several of the parties are extremely ideologically similar. This is like a really valuable service. Okay, it's actually very difficult to distinguish among the parties, even for political scientists. So imagine you're like the man or the woman on the street. This site basically offers you a personalised and pretty much instant voting advice. Okay, there are different ways of which they achieve this, kind of corresponding to different theories of political science, basically, and different ways of measuring party positions. But this kind of underlying functionality is the same thing. Okay? So just here's a couple of examples. So this is I've just circled the advice part of the page. It doesn't come out like this. I just wanted to highlight your attention to it. So these are my opinions. Okay. So you can see I'm a pretty left-wing guy from it. So I'm described in this Votomatic site. This was the site that ran for the Irish general election recently as a hardcore Labour supporter. Interestingly, they didn't include the United Left Alliance with the Socialist Party, who probably would have actually scored better for me, given my own personal preferences. Okay, but so basically I went on, answered my questions about the public policy matters of the day, and this is the feedback that I got, okay, in the Irish side. This is the site that we're looking at today, the effects of the Dutch Kieskompas site. You can see that it uses a slightly different logic, so rather than looking at agreement, it looks at spatial proximity. But still, again, circled in red, you get quite a concrete voting advice recommendation. Okay, you're told, look, you're closest to G66, these kind of, what you call them, progressive right-wing party in the Dutch party system. And if you vote based on policy preferences, you should really be looking at these guys. Okay, so you get pretty concrete recommendations, pretty clear to the user who they're being advised to vote for. Okay, I should probably insert a caveat at this point that this isn't the only functionality of these sites. So you can drill down into the results and look at issue by issue. They're meant to be kind of voter education tools as much as advice generators. But certainly the thing that coheres all these types of sites together is that they generate these advices. Okay? So why should we care about this? Why should we care about these particular types of sites when there's so many different types of sites and blogs and so forth out there to study? Well, firstly, they're hugely influential, and just in terms of user numbers. Okay, so that's a good way to distinguish what we should study from what we shouldn't. Okay, so I mean, I think in the 2006 elections, like 38% of the Dutch population reported visiting one of these sites. Okay, during the campaign. So I mean, that's about as influential a campaign moment as you can hope for. Okay, as you can hope to study. Secondly, people tell us that they matter. Okay, so surveys of users afterwards in kind of a range of countries. They vary significantly. The question formats vary. It's a really emerging field. But anywhere between 10% and 70% of respondents in such surveys have said that they matter, at least in some way, for the potential vote. Okay, so we have strong reason to suspect, basically, that these sites matter, and matter in a meaningful way in terms of the actual outcome of the election. Thirdly, you know, the question really that I seek to answer here, that Thomas and Andre and I seek to answer, is are VA sites influential campaign actors? Okay, do they somehow change the behaviour of people who visit them? If the answer is yes, I would argue that, you know, we should be obliged really as an academic discipline to think about these things very carefully, because what effectively VA sites are is applied political science research. Okay, it's kind of used, like when I did it in Ireland, we used the Benoit Labour survey. Andre and his team used a kind of a hand coding system. You know, you're basically looking at political science being put before the user in a kind of a usable framework, and they're given an advice based on kind of certain premises and theories. So if these things are influential, we should be looking at them, because this is the influence that our research can actually have on the public, okay, which is presumably why we're all doing this stuff. Okay, so research question: do people follow the advice that they receive on VA sites when voting? Okay, it's a deceptively simple question, as anyone who's ever tried to study media effects will likely tell you. Like any campaign effect, it's extremely difficult to say whether there's an effect or not. Okay, so it's a classic problem in media studies. Do the media that people consume influence them, or do they just pick the media to tell them what they already want to know? Okay, so do they mold or mirror preferences? Extremely difficult with VA, which seek to kind of mirror the preferences of each individual user specifically. So that's the design of the site. So they try and give you an advice that's congruent with your opinions. So how can you say that advice then has any effect? Okay, so even if people vote, even if 90% of people are found to vote the same way they were advised, would we not just say, well, that's just a site that's good at identifying people's preferences? So that's the kind of methodological problem we're up against. Okay, so our approach involves kind of using, it's this kind of idea that Rachel discussed, is kind of using the features of the online space and integrating it into your research design. So a great thing about online is people, when they visit your site, generate these things called log files, which are just records of what happened to them on the site, okay? And for our purposes here, there were two traits of the log files that we were extremely interested in. The first one is advice. So we get an objective measure of advice. So rather than people recalling their advice, and we found when we looked at the recall advice that people tended, if they misremembered, they tended to vote for the party that they voted for. So if we use recall advice, we'd overestimate how influential VAs are. Okay, does that make sense? Because there'd be a higher association than there actually was. It must just be something to do with, I don't know, it's kind of easy, it's at the top of your head, right? If you just voted for the party, that's probably the party you plug out of the air. There might be some kind of justification effect there as well. Anyway, but we have actually what happened to them here, and that's a nice feature of working with online data. Secondly, and this is the key to kind of isolating an effect, we're able to control for their advices before the advice was given, or their preferences for each party before the advice was given. Okay, so we're able to capture what they thought of each party the moment before they got the advice, because it's a feature of the website that Andre very cleverly built in, was that we ask the users the questions, you know, the issue questions, then we say, listen guys, could you just tell us how likely are you to vote for each of the parties competing, and then boom, the advice comes out in the next page. So in terms of kind of research design, it's pretty sweet, right, because we capture their self-estimated likelihood to vote right before they get the advice, okay? And then what you'll see in the design is, after that we kind of split them into two groups, the advised parties and the not advised parties, and then we can see where the advised party is more likely when we control for this pre-advised preference. Okay? So we have the log files, then we did, in order to kind of see how people voted, we did a survey of our users, okay? So again, this was just something that was there when I arrived here in Peace Compass, which is great. Is that the users are asked to provide their emails and to do a survey after the use, okay? So we sent that out. We got 4,500 responses, more or less, and that told us how the people voted. So we combined the voting data with the log file data. Okay, so we have the three elements basically that we need to look at to try and say maybe there's an effect here. Okay, how they felt before, what advice they got, how they voted afterwards. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think I'll just skip to the main evidence then. So, just very quickly, we asked them just subjectively, you know, how influenced were you by the site? 35% said 0 out of 10, but 65% then obviously said between 0 and 10. So there's a little histogram here. So you can see that there's the biggest single category of people saying no way, but collectively the people who say there's some influence outweigh them. Then we looked at how many people actually voted in line with the advice, and it was 26%. But then if you divide up the two groups, you see two totally different stories. Okay, and this is basically the finding of the paper, even though we do a kind of better analysis later. This is what we found, that if people are advised to vote for a party that they were thinking of voting for anyway, you know, that's where all the people who vote congruently are. You know, that makes a lot of sense. Very few people got advised to vote for a party that they thought was a 1 or a 2 or a 3, and then that totally flipped their mind and made them vote for that party. Okay, so they're the kind of descriptive findings, and they make sense, right? I mean, logically, you wouldn't expect just a visit to a website to totally overturn someone's prior preferences, given the importance of politics in life. But there might be a little add-on effect, and that's what we wanted to look at. Okay. So when we control for the preferences for each party before the advice, we want to see, like, when we separate the party user dyads that we make. Okay. So every user is represented as 11 dyads. Were the dyads that were recommended more likely to be the voted dyads than the ones that weren't? Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Sorry, because I'm having to fly through it here in 15 minutes. So I'll just skip through these slides. So what we're looking at really is this idea of a conversion rate. This kind of illustrates what we're doing. So for every value of PTV, a certain percentage of people went on to vote for that party. Okay, so if we have 4,200 users, that's like 43,000 user voter dyads. Okay, and we split them into two groups, two kind of experimental groups, if you like. So this is the overall population. So 71% of dyads that were 10 went on to be a voted dyad. Okay, so people could have multiple 10s. That's how you don't have a higher percentage there. But then when you split the two groups, so the recommended versus the not recommended group, you see a pretty clear difference start to emerge, right? It's about between kind of what is it there, about 20% for the very high for the 10s, but it's kind of it's consistent. It's actually quite a powerful difference. It's statistically significant after you get to a PTV of 6. Okay, so the point here is that it doesn't really matter if you get a recommendation or not if it's for a party that you weren't really thinking about voting. Okay, if your PTV for the party before the recommendation was between 0 and 5, either way, recommended or not, you have a very low probability of voting for that party. Okay, as you go beyond though, once you get a recommendation that's congruent with what you thought before, it does seem to firm up your likelihood of voting for that party, and we can demonstrate that statistically here with these findings. So I've just demonstrated it graphically here. That kind of makes it a little bit clearer than the table. And you can see the gap between the two groups is pretty big, right? In terms of the percentage of each group to go on to vote for that party, you have a kind of a 15 to 20% difference for each value of PTV. Okay, and just to make sure that we were kind of confident in this finding, we also did it with a logistic regression. Okay.
It's more like 15 seconds.
So basically, the logistic regression runs the same findings. So you can run a logit, and you can extrapolate and clarify. And again, for the recommended group, if you look at the probabilities there, they're much higher than the non-recommended group when you control the PTV. Okay, so they're again getting the recommendation when you're likely to vote for that party that you're recommended seems to make you 15 to 20% more likely to vote for that party. That's the finding that we arrived at through this methodology. And overall, I'd say, just to conclude very briefly, that I'd say it's a rather optimistic finding, okay? Because there's this kind of response to these sites that's very much negative, and it's like people are telling people what to think. And I don't know if you guys remember the Luddite movement in the UK and the Industrial Revolution. These guys are going around smashing up machines because the machines are taking their jobs. And this is the kind of idea that computers like taking over your brain, nearly telling you what to think. But people don't let it tell them what to think. But people listen to the advice. And that's what we found.
Okay, great. Thanks.